Proposition 114 is a citizen-initiated ballot measure that will be on the fall ballot November 2020 here in Colorado. And basically it will mandate that the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission develop a science-based plan to restore wolves to the western slope of Colorado by the year 2023. Wolves were once the most widely distributed land mammal on the planet. They were distributed throughout the northern hemisphere, but due to habitat loss and predator control, they were eradicated through much of their range. Now, wolves have recovered in some areas in the lower 48, including the northern Rocky Mountains. Today, they occupy about 15% of their historic range in the lower U.S. There's about 6,000 wolves now.
I am the director of Colorado Wolf and Wildlife Center, and that's where we're at here today in Divide. We have our gray wolves out here. We haven't had wolves in Colorado since 1945.
So for the most part, it's been about 75 years of wolves being absent from the state. Over the past year, Colorado Parks and Wildlife has documented a small number of wolves in northern Colorado. Now, this small number wouldn't be considered a viable population of wolves in the state. A viable population is one that has sufficient numbers and sufficient distribution such that it has a high likelihood of persisting over the long term. The wolves currently in Colorado are at risk. In fact, recent reports suggest that several wolves in the wolf pack in northwest Colorado may have been killed along the Colorado-Wyoming border. Wolves in Colorado have full legal protection because they're covered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. But wolves in almost all of Wyoming and most of Wyoming have no legal protection. So they can be killed on site without a hunting license or without a hunting season. And that level of human pressure really lowers the likelihood that wolves would be able to migrate down into Colorado. And so it lowers the likelihood that a viable population of wolves could grow from continued colonization. If the goal is to restore a viable population of wolves in the state, then active reintroduction by wildlife managers would be the best route to achieve that goal.
Ultimately, where wolves live and whether they thrive in habitats depends on people's attitudes and actions towards wolves. And so that's why I study public attitudes and behaviors related to wolf restoration.
The Center for Human-Carnivore Coexistence was formed this year, and we're a team of social and ecological scientists whose mission is to develop approaches to minimize conflict and to facilitate coexistence between people and predators, including wolves if they're fully restored to Colorado.
To look at the level of public support for wolf restoration in Colorado. We did an online survey of over 700 residents to understand their perspectives towards wolf reintroduction. And what we found was that support for wolf restoration was actually quite high. So we found that 84% of Coloradans would vote for wolf restoration. And while that might seem really surprising to some, that number is actually similar to previous surveys that have been conducted on wolf restoration. And so there's a high level of social support here in this state. People supported wolf restoration for a variety of different reasons. And so the most commonly discussed reason was that the fact that wolves might provide some ecosystem balance or help the environment.
Multiple scientific studies have concluded that Colorado can still support a viable population of wolves, and specifically Western Colorado is primed for wolf restoration. Wolves basically can exist in a variety of different habitat types. What they need is sufficient prey, and they need to be tolerated by humans. In the western United States, the best habitat for wolves would be public lands, where both of those needs are met, where there's ample prey and also there's less conflict with people. Colorado supports over 24 million acres of public land, mostly on the western slope, and it also supports a robust big game population. The ecological effect of wolves is complicated. Scientific studies, primarily in national parks like Yellowstone, have suggested that wolves might reduce overbrowsing by elk and deer, which might allow vegetation to recover, which might improve habitat for a variety of wildlife species. But other scientific studies have concluded that it's a more complicated story than that, and that wolves are not solely responsible for the kinds of ecosystem-level changes that we've seen in Yellowstone over the last 20 years. It's also unclear the extent to which these kinds of ecosystem-level impacts of wolves up in Yellowstone might translate to other systems outside of national parks, outside of protected areas, including in Colorado. So in short, it's a complicated story. What we might expect in Colorado is that where wolves maintain high enough densities for a long enough time, that we might see some ecological impacts. In other areas, their ecological effects might be lower if they occur in lower densities.
People also talked about how they wanted wolves for what's called existence value. It makes people feel good to know that wolves exist out there for themselves and for future generations. Some other reasons included positive impacts on tourism from wolf watching and the ability to watch wolves in the wild or listen to them when people go out hiking. People also talked about how it might enhance Colorado pride, that they would feel better about their state if they lived in a state where reintroduction of native species was prioritized. Moral arguments are basically arguments about whether something is right or wrong, or good or bad, and they're often used both in favor and against wolf reintroduction. And so on the supportive side for wolf reintroduction, people use several different moral arguments. So people will say, actually restoring species to where they once lived is the morally right thing to do. And we should be living and coexisting with these species on the landscape that deserve to live here, and we should extend our compassion to other species. People also make the moral argument that the majority of the public's values of wolves has not been considered in decision-making in the past. And so there's actually a moral argument that a democratic way of making this decision is the right thing to do. Just because the majority of the public does support wolf restoration doesn't mean that we should listen to the concerns of those who are worried about wolf restoration. And it's really important that we understand and address these concerns in any sort of management plan that we develop if wolves were to be restored in the state. In our survey, we found that people were concerned about their safety, actually, and the safety of their pets. Wolves attacking livestock and posing a threat to the ranching industry. They were concerned about wolves wandering into residential areas, causing conflict, and they were concerned that wolf management would be difficult and costly, and also might have impacts on hunting, as well as elk and deer populations in the state.
We know in North America, since 1900, only 2 people have been killed by wild wolves, one in Canada and one in Alaska. Since 1900, no people have been killed by wolves in the lower 48 US states. Overall, wolves typically avoid people, so direct encounters are rare. Wolves may kill pets if they encounter them, just like other large carnivores that we have here in Colorado, such as mountain lions or coyotes. This is particularly true for dogs, if dogs intrude into wolf territories. Now, wolves killing dogs is actually a rare occurrence. It most often occurs in states with wolves where there are hunting dogs. So the best option is to protect your pets by keeping them close to you in wolf country, just like we do here in Colorado in predator country. The interaction between wolves and big game is complicated and generalizations are difficult. What scientific studies indicate is that wolves can contribute to local declines in prey populations, particularly when they act in conjunction with other factors that also limit big game, such as severe winters or human hunting or other predators. Wolves can also change the behavior of elk and deer, for example, make them move more or make them more wary, and this also might make hunting more challenging in some areas. But it's important to emphasize that wolves and big game in hunting can and do coexist, as is evident by abundant big game and ample hunting opportunities in other states with wolves, such as Alaska or the Great Lakes or the northern Rocky Mountain states of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. What we can expect here in Colorado is very similar probably to the northern Rocky Mountain states. At a statewide level, we would expect a relatively low impact of wolves on big game populations as a whole, but there might be some local impacts to some herds if wolves maintain high enough densities for long enough time, and if wolf predation acts in concert with other factors that are also limiting big game.
And then we also have people making moral arguments that actually we shouldn't be restoring wolves because wolves might get shot, because there's animal ethics concerns of transporting wolves all this way and letting them go and allowing them to get into conflict with people and with livestock. We also have people who say it's morally wrong to have the majority of the public vote for wolf reintroduction when the impacts, the negative impacts of wolves are going to be concentrated on just a small minority of people.
Predation of wolves on livestock is one of the most contentious issues regarding wolf restoration to Colorado. What scientific studies tell us is that wolves have a small overall impact on the livestock industry as a whole in the northern Rocky Mountains. Wolves killing cattle accounts for less than 1% of the annual gross income of the livestock industry in the northern Rocky Mountains. But these costs are unevenly distributed, with some ranchers, some producers experiencing significant impacts and others experiencing none. And that's an important point. For the individual ranchers, when wolves move in and attack or kill or stress out their livestock, that's a significant economic and emotional impact. And it's important to consider because it's going to be these individual ranchers that bear the brunt of the cost of wolves.
So there's a lot of different reasons people have for either supporting or not supporting a wolf reintroduction initiative. And it's important to consider these diverse values when making decisions about wildlife management. And so it's important to go out and get some information to understand exactly how wolves may impact those things that you value, both positively and negatively. We have worked with the Center for Collaborative Conservation at CSU and CSU Extension to develop a series of information sheets. And these information sheets cover a range of topics, from the ecology of wolves, how wolves might impact ecosystems, to wolf impacts on livestock. So I definitely encourage you to go out, seek out those materials and read them and educate yourself. And I also encourage you to go out and share information about wolves with others that you know and engage in a dialogue with your friends and family.
If you'd like to learn more about wolves, you can come out to our center out here. A lot of what we do out here is educational nature walk. We'll talk to you about the history of the animals. We get in some basic biology, how big they are, as you can see. And we also talk about their key part in the ecosystem. A lot of people come out here from all over the world, but especially Coloradans, you come out here to see the beauty of Colorado, and maybe someday we'll be able to hear the howl of the wolf in Colorado.